Hey everybody! So, we're looking in more detail now about mitosis and meiosis. So, these are the two ways that cells divide. And the best way to start is to look at just a summary of all the different stages of mitosis and meiosis, because scientists have named each stage to help them realize and learn more about the process. So firstly, for mitosis, there's an acronym we can use to remember the process and all the steps, and that is IPMAT. IPMAT. Or IPMAT-C is the full version, actually. And then meiosis is similar, but it basically repeats itself again. So in meiosis, we have IPMAT, PMAT, C. So it basically repeats these middle four stages. Okay, so they're not a very interesting acronym, but it helps you to remember the name of each step. And the names of all these steps are interphase, is I, P is prophase, M is metaphase, A is anaphase, T is telophase or telophase, and C is cytokinesis. And so in meiosis, you can see it still has an interphase, and it still has prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase, but then it has a second round of those stages, and then it has cytokinesis again. So if you remember these acronyms, you'll remember the steps in the processes. The next thing to think about is that technically, it's only the four middle stages, prophase to telophase, that are actually mitosis. Because technically, mitosis is just division of the nucleus. So the nucleus of the cell, it needs to copy its DNA, and it needs to separate DNA into two new daughter cells. And so technically, mitosis is just the nucleus dividing. The nucleus divides. But the overall process we can call mitotic cell division. So it's cells dividing using mitosis. And it's exactly the same for meiosis too. So technically, it's only these middle stages that are meiosis, and the overall process we call meiotic cell division. And remember, that's the type of cell division that happens in the gonads of species to make sperm and egg cells, which can then combine to make a new offspring. So they're the technical names, meiotic cell division and mitotic cell division, but most people just call them mitosis and meiosis for short. Okay, so the next thing is, what do these stages actually look like in the life cycle of cells? So here's mitosis firstly. So we're starting off with a parent cell, as we've learnt before, and that parent cell is going to divide into its two daughter cells by the end of the process. And remember, in mitosis, these daughter cells are identical to the parent cell. They've got exactly the same DNA and chromosomes that the parent had. Okay, so you can see here in the stages, the first stage is interphase, like we learnt before in our IPMAT-C. So interphase, this is basically the cell in its normal part of its life cycle, just doing whatever it does. So if it's a muscle cell, it's being a muscle cell, it's contracting when it needs to. Or if it's a salivary gland cell, it's just making lots of saliva and doing its job for the body. But when it comes time to divide, then it will start mitosis. So you can see prophase here. The chromosomes duplicate themselves, so they take a photocopy, and that's why they look like an X. Because in the interphase, each chromosome is just a single molecule of DNA, but in the prophase, they duplicate. So then there's one copy on the left and one copy on the right. So DNA strands, or the chromosomes, duplicate. Okay, so the next stage is metaphase, and you can see here all the chromosomes line up in the middle of the cell. Meta means middle. Then in the anaphase, the two halves of the double chromosomes, they separate and get pulled to each end of the cell. So in our red and green example, we've got the red half of the chromosome gets pulled apart and the green half goes to the other side. And remember, these were identical copies. So when we get to the telophase, we've got one set of chromosomes in the top cell and an identical set of chromosomes in the bottom cell to make the two daughter cells. So that's the nucleus dividing, that's mitosis. And then the final stage in cell division is cytokinesis, which is C. And cyto, remember, relates to cells. And kinesis means to pull apart or to chop. So the cell pulls apart into two, and that gives us our daughter cells at the end. So that's how we get our acronym of IPMAT-C. Terrible acronym, but that's one way to remember it. Okay, the next thing to look at is meiosis. So remember, the acronym for meiosis is IPMAT, PMAT, C. So we still have interphase at the start. So here's the cell doing its normal thing. We still have cytokinesis at the end. So the very last step is for the cells to break apart into daughter cells. But we have 2 rounds of dividing the nucleus. So that's what's different in meiosis. And the reason for that, remember, is that meiosis, the goal of meiosis is to make haploid daughter cells. Which are called gametes. And then when those gametes fuse together during reproduction, that's what gives us a diploid cell that grows into a new offspring. Alright, so briefly looking at all the stages, the key difference in meiosis compared to mitosis is the first metaphase. So let's just focus on that. Looking back at mitosis, remember in the first metaphase here, all the chromosomes line up in a single row, ready to be pulled apart into their 2 copies. But in metaphase 1, in meiosis, the chromosomes actually pair up. Because remember, we've got 2 copies of each chromosome in our body cells. So the two chromosome 1s pair up, the chromosome 2s pair up, all the way down to chromosome 23, the sex chromosomes. And so that means in Anaphase 1, when the chromosomes pull apart, a whole chromosome actually goes to either end of the cell. So that means that the first two daughter cells that are made, these are already haploid, because they've only got one copy of each chromosome. And then we get to a second round of nucleus dividing, so the second PMAT. And this is basically exactly the same as mitosis. We've got prophase again, we've got metaphase again, and here all the chromosomes line up in a single row, just like mitosis. Then we've got anaphase again, and here the chromosomes pull apart, just like in mitosis. So we've got, remember, one red half gets pulled apart, and the green half gets pulled apart to a different part of the cell. And then finally, those two daughter cells divide completely in cytokinesis, and that gives us our 4 daughter cells at the end. So that key step there is metaphase 1, and that's what leads to cells being haploid at the end of meiosis. So for now, you need to be able to name all the stages and recognize stages in cell division if you see a diagram of them.